Hey everyone, and thanks for coming to my talk, From Phycology to Policy, Turning Passion into Action. I'm really thrilled to be here, and as Emma and Jess have said, I've thoroughly enjoyed the kelp culture presentations, and it's truly an honor to be able to present to y'all today. So, okay, there we go. All right. So for those of you who don't already know me, my name is Pike, and I serve as the Ocean Protection Council's Biodiversity Program Manager. I'll be diving into my role at OPC, who we are, and who we are later in this talk. But for now, just keep in mind that we are a cabinet-level policy body within the California Natural Resources Agency. And I came to OPC with a bunch of experience in nearshore ecosystems, mostly in kelp forest ecology. And so I'd like to walk you through that journey and hopefully show you how a background in natural history can be instrumental in informing governance-level decision-making. And as stated, even though I work at the nexus between science and policy, I still think of myself as an ecologist at heart. And I've used kelp forests as a window with which to view the natural world. Phycology has helped ground that viewpoint, and I tend to think of systems through that phycological lens. And now I'll be the first to admit that things are incredibly different than they were when I graduated from undergrad way back in the Stone Age. But I think that there may be some undergrads and current grad students in the audience. So take my rambling advice with a grain of salt, because I might have an ulterior motive here today. Hopefully, I can show you how you can channel your curiosity and passion into something actionable. But don't forget to stay true to your roots. Studying marine ecology was my way of spending as much time in, on, and under the water as much as possible, exploring ecosystems and hanging with denizens of the deep. And even though I've hung up my dry suit and my wetsuit for a different kind of suit, I still think there might be some nuggets for y'all today. And I don't need to impress upon you how lucky we are to have not one, but two canopy-forming kelps in California that make these vast, mesmerizing subtidal forests. And yes, I see you intertidal people and your weird and wacky macrophytes, but my formal training started at UC Santa Cruz as an undergrad, where I became absolutely enamored by the Central Coast's submerged macroalgal kelp forests. And in fact, it was by a happy accident that I came to love macrophytes and phycology in general. But that's a story for a different day. So, after 4 amazing and intense years, I graduated from UCSC with a bachelor's in marine biology, and I had no idea what to do with myself. So, I taught scuba for a summer and worked in a dive shop. Why not? But working retail made me kind of sad. I wasn't able to test my newly learned marine biology chops. So I did what any reasonable, desperate, and recently graduated kid would do. I became a fishery observer in the West Coast Ground Fish Observer Program. I thought, hey, maybe I'll get into fisheries science. That's an employable field, right? Well, it turns out being an observer still made me kind of sad, but not for the reasons you might think. The years that I spent working on commercial fishing boats taught me invaluable life lessons, including what it takes to work with and in resource-dependent communities. And the relationships that I built with the commercial fishers had a dramatic impact on the trajectory of the rest of my career. But I really wanted to work under, not on the water. So I spent a little time working as a kelp forest restoration technician down in Palos Verdes. Talk about applied science in action. We had a smashing good time, and things really started to take shape in my mind. It was during this time that I started to reach out to prospective advisors to see about graduate positions in their labs. But I got to take an amazing detour first. The summer before I started grad school, I was awarded an internship with the National Park Service through the Our World Underwater Scholarship Society. Now, undergrads and early grad students, take note. This was absolutely the opportunity of a lifetime, and I highly suggest checking out OUS for opportunities. My 100 days before the arrowhead, as I like to call it, was my first chance to peek behind the curtain and see what it's really like to work as a government employee. Working with the good folks across the entire National Park Service showed me what civil service truly means, and this remains a constant theme in my career. At the conclusion of that internship, I immediately began a whole new chapter with the San Diego State University Beer Pig Lab. That is, benthic ecology, experimental research, phycology in general. I found myself immersed with some of the biggest phycological nerds out there. Scientists who care deeply about their work, the underwater world, and the scientific pursuit of knowledge. I owe a huge debt of gratitude to my fellow pigs, and of course, our fearless leader, Dr. Matt Edwards. And I learned the hard way just how difficult it is to design and execute novel research. I was so curious about community ecology and phycology that I almost lost the kelp forest through the stipes. It was exhausting, but of course, grad school should be fun. Being overworked and underpaid is all part of the journey. But not only did I grow as a human, I grew as a scientist as well. And let me walk you through that. I was originally brought into the Edwards lab to support a massive expedition across the Aleutian archipelago. We spent 2 summers studying patterns of productivity in kelp forests, urchin barrens, and the transition zones between these stable states. This work set up my own thesis, and both projects profoundly changed the way I view the natural world and the tools we use to study it. And for those of you unfamiliar with the Aleutians, with the islands, the Aleutians are the island chain that extend westward from the Alaskan Peninsula, basically to Russia, and split the North Pacific from the Bering Sea. It was here that the late Dr. Jim Estes first proposed the otter, kelp, urchin trophic cascade that we all know and love, or hate. In 2016, we hit the Central Islands and headed east, and in 2017, we started west and then made our way back to the Alaskan Peninsula. And if you've never been lucky enough to reach these remote islands, this is the sign that greets you when you land on Adak. Birthplace of the winds indeed. Holy cow, does it blow out there. But for 2 summers, we made our home on the research vessel Oceanus and utilized smaller boats to get to and from our dive sites, which sometimes were under active volcanoes, which is pretty cool. It was hard, demanding work in frigid water, and we worked nearly around the clock to set up these wild experiments in all sorts of conditions. But the views were absolutely breathtaking. This was an all hands on deck expedition, but I've never seen such wild and pristine ecosystems before. And of course, the macroalgae. I mean, wow. I'd never seen some of these species, whole genera I'd never even heard of. The dominant and often only surface expressing species at those latitudes is the annual kelp, Eularia fistulosa, known as the dragon kelp. But I called it the dragging kelp because it is so darn sticky. And we were lugging these experiments and all this chain and all of these sensors all through the kelp forests and urchin barrens and transition zones. And it was a lot of work. And after all that time at sea and all those hours underwater, I had to ask myself, was it worth it? What did we learn? What did we bring back with us? We uncovered differences in net ecosystem productivity, biomass, and diversity across these 3 systems and across the whole island chain. We published some papers, and you can read all about it. But in the end, what did it mean for us as scientists and for the systems we dedicated ourselves to studying? These questions would haunt me as I worked on my own thesis. I took a similar approach and looked at ecosystem productivity using a slightly different model in kelp forests and urchin barrens in Stillwater Cove up in Monterey, California, Point Loma in San Diego, California, and at a really neat spot called Campo Kennedy down in Baja, California, just south of Ensenada. Transition zones don't really exist in California's kelp forests, except in certain places where geography and/or geology factors in. But still, these three locations allowed me to answer some really interesting questions and form lasting partnerships with academic institutions and colleagues from across the state and south of the border, including an artisanal fishing cooperative in Baja who manage their own kelp forests and urchin barrens. And for this project, we found that species-specific biomass drives production on these rocky reefs, which is actually not so surprising if you really think about it. Certain macroalgae simply photosynthesize at different rates under different conditions, and some species are more productive than others. But due to that productivity, they might end up respiring more. And these are tricky things to try to uncover at the community scale, which is what we tried to do. And since this group is so phycologically focused, I'll just briefly say that the field deployments for this work were coupled with lab bench experiments. I used photosynthesis versus irradiance curves to understand how a diversity of these understory species respond to different light treatments, which led me to disentangle the species-specific biomass and light response curves. Of course, you can read all about it if you want, but I won't be offended if you don't. But in my case, outreach and education helped displace the existential scaries that came with cage it, count it, cut it ecology. While I was still haunted by those big questions that came up while we were in the Aleutians, I started a little SciComm project called Project Pegasus, where I led a group of local high schoolers in the construction and use of a remotely operated vehicle. We blogged all about it and had an absolute blast. Now, this and much of my extracurricular work during grad school isn't exactly algal in nature. So I'll just say for those current students out there, don't be afraid to explore your interests and passions. You'll never know where they'll take you. And as I alluded to, during my time in grad school, I couldn't shake those lingering questions. What does it all matter? And what does it all mean? I kept reading in papers at the end of a compelling discussion built on excellent science over and over again. Marine managers who wish to do something about the thing should consider doing something. But what was it? And why weren't they doing it? I figured I'd find out for myself by applying to the California Sea Grant State Fellowship Program. This program, which is designed for recently finished graduate students, was absolutely a career accelerator, and I cannot recommend it enough to folks interested in bridging the gaps between science, policy, and management. So for 1 year, I got to work with the good folks at Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary, where I helped support the Sanctuary Advisory Council, the outreach and education team, and helped kickstart the sanctuary's management plan revision process. Now, apologies for any sanctuary folks who might be listening in, but at the time, that last piece felt a bit like watching paint dry. But now I know better. Engaging with the public, constituents, scientists, and other management and policy entities to solicit feedback and shape the management actions of a national marine sanctuary for years to come is truly and honestly inspiring and exciting work. All of those academic papers attempting to, in their own special way, incite action, well, this is one avenue where rubber meets the road. But once my fellowship year ended, I found myself via a bizarre series of events, mostly due to the onset of the COVID pandemic. I ended up contracting with the sanctuary's research team for about a year and a half, where I dove deep into programming, designing management tools, community engagement to find endangered white abalone, and even wrote a paper about giant sea bass movement and behavior. I then took a job as a full-time federal marine scientist at Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary for another year and a half, but none of that really focused on kelp or algae, so I'll just speed up to the good part. In spring 2023, I joined the Ocean Protection Council as the Biodiversity Program Manager. Here at OPC, we have a simple mission: protect California's coast and ocean. We are the governor's advisors on coast and ocean policy and support the state's policy initiatives for all things coast and ocean. We do this through the 4 pillars of our strategic plan, as seen here. What does it all mean? And what does it all matter? I finally found my platform and my voice to help turn the tide against ecosystem loss in California, among many other projects. This is just a little snapshot into my life at OPC. On any given day, I'm flying at 10,000 feet to try to understand how and where we can apply leverage to positively impact the coast, ocean, and the communities across the state. And as you can see from my portfolio, I dabble in more than just kelp forest restoration and research. I encourage folks to take a broad view perspective of their interests in marine ecology. You never know when that one-off lecture in an invertebrate zoology class might influence the development of a $500,000 investment saving a species from extinction. As a reminder, the staff of the OPC serve the council and provide recommendations on strategic investments and policy development. This requires subject matter expertise, scientific synthesis, and the ability to distill the weedy and nuanced into something digestible and intelligible for a general audience. But today, I'm sure you're all most interested in what we're doing for California's kelp forest ecosystems. Catalyzed by the near-total kelp canopy collapse on the North Coast over the last decade or so, we've taken bold action to conserve, restore, and protect biodiversity bolster climate resilience, and maintain ecosystem services. In 2021, the state released a kelp action plan containing strategies and opportunities to address the kelp crisis, and so far, OPC has invested more than $11 million to implement the action plan, including monitoring kelp forest health, improving our understanding of kelp loss and recovery, and testing restoration approaches. We've also doubled down on our vision for implementing 30 by 30 and are currently in the review process for a $10 million investment to support that end. In December 2025, we had our 5-year strategic plan approved by the council, and in 2024, this great state overwhelmingly passed Proposition 4, also known as the Climate Bond. More on those 2 points soon. To continue moving the needle forward, the state released an enhanced status report for giant and bull kelp several years ago and issued a precautionary closure for bull kelp harvest on the North Coast to aid in natural recovery. In 2023, we took a major step forward by launching the development of a statewide, ecosystem-based, adaptive kelp restoration and management plan. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife, in partnership with OPC, is working to ensure that this statewide plan, which builds on the action plan, is informed by the best available science, community input, and tribal perspectives. So, what is the KRMP? This will be a novel, ecosystem-based fisheries management plan for kelp forests supported by giant and bull kelp. The KRMP will provide a science-based framework for managing, protecting, and restoring kelp forests in the face of changing ocean conditions. The plan will build out a comprehensive management framework for kelp forests across the state, incorporating restoration as a critical component in a suite of management options to ensure that these communities are sustainably managed into the future. This can be thought of as a fisheries management plan plus, in that it will go beyond essential elements of a fisheries management plan as defined in the Marine Life Management Act, and will include an adaptive harvest framework and a restoration toolkit under an overarching ecosystem-based management approach. The latter two components are entirely novel. To date, no state fishery management plan has attempted to incorporate these elements, but such bold and innovative management strategies are essential for meeting the urgency of the climate crisis. And those strategic investments I hinted at earlier, coupled with expert community and tribal input, ensure that the KRMP will be built on a rigorously thoughtful scientific foundation. The ongoing Accelerating Kelp Research Program projects, as well as the completed Kelp Restoration and Research Program projects, and the recently funded Adaptive Management projects, directly inform the development of the KRMP's Restoration Toolkit and dovetail with the long-term monitoring programs we rely on to make informed decisions about our nearshore ecosystems. Since 2023, we have initiated a multi-pronged approach to developing the KRMP, consisting of a community working group, a science advisory committee, and a tribal engagement strategy that is integrated through a variety of channels in order to ensure that the development of the KRMP is responsive to the needs of the state, including California Native American tribes. Active partnerships and collaborations are underway with key state and federal agencies to ensure the KRMP facilitates streamlined and effective management. And in the meantime, we could not achieve our vision for healthy, vibrant, resilient kelp forests without ground truthing experimental restoration approaches. For now, that takes on one of two flavors, either grazer suppression or kelp enhancement. And now we can spend an entire kelp culture session just talking about these two approaches. But since we're almost at time, let's just say that we're still investigating, experimenting, tinkering, and learning. And we couldn't do it without many of the folks on this call across the state, the West Coast, and globally. But our vision isn't to simply put a band-aid on the axe wound. We're actively working to make meaningful progress against the dual threats of anthropogenic climate change and biodiversity loss. We're engaging meaningfully with a diversity of partners, addressing knowledge gaps, learning by doing, and working to get the KRMP developed and implemented at breakneck speed. And I'm thrilled to share that we are now basically armed to the teeth. I hinted at this earlier, but our 2026 to 2030 strategic plan was adopted by the Council at our December 2025 meeting. In this plan, we have bold targets to help us achieve our vision. And most of the targets under Objective 3.3 fall squarely in my wheelhouse. And you're reading Objective 3.3.2 correctly. We have until 2030 to restore 2,000 acres of kelp forests across this great state. Is it ambitious? You'd better believe it. But not only has the council spoken, California voters have as well. Thanks to Proposition 4, we have a lever long enough to make positive change. And in the words of OPC Council member Dr. Alexis Jackson, we have to be uncomfortable in the pursuit of excellence. So at this point, I hope I've convinced you that there is a need in the policy development landscape for passion, enthusiasm, and a deep love of the natural world. I once spoke for the understory, but now I speak for the whole forest and across the whole coast. While these are dark times we find ourselves in, I hope you can take a little solace in the notion that we're not working in a vacuum. The weird, the obscure, the mysterious, disentangling the Gordian knot requires all hands on deck. We're in this fight together, and we're working to go far together. So before I end, I just want to briefly acknowledge all the help I've had along the way on this journey from phycology to policy. These are just a few of the faces that help shape the way that I think and, in their own way, contributed to this immense body of work. And to all you current students out there, I encourage you to make connections, lean on your friends, pester your colleagues, seek out mentors, and hold the door open for the next generation, because you'll never know who you'll be answering to one day. So thanks so much for listening to me ramble. Thanks for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.